What you just described there is perfect alienation. This is perfect alienation. Now, there's a philosopher, Jean-Paul Sartre, who says we are condemned to freedom, and then there's a disturbance of the soul that accompanies it.
Inevitable.
Inevitable. Because, as you said, freedom demands responsibility, there are possibilities, choices, and then there's anguish, and then you don't get out. You
don't get out, that's
my question. I mean, the individual searching for their essence, searching for their identity, making their choices, living their anguish, do they achieve this alone in today's world, or do influences, groups, and the demands of that interfere, and there's no longer this Sartrean individual responsible for their essence and for who they are?
The relationship between bodies. You know, you ask a question within this existentialist understanding of the mid-20th century, where Sartre would say, in the case of our life, existence precedes essence.
That is, we live first. And because if there were an essence that enslaved us, there would be no freedom, right? And since I'm like the cat, Epaminondas, who is the cat? It's my cat. He's not worth it to him, because since he's a cat, he's an employee of the species, right? He's there to reproduce the species. He has to live like a cat. He's a slave to his catness, and Epaminondas doesn't go to the moon, doesn't smoke a pipe, doesn't ride the subway, no, nothing. Epaminondas lives the life of a cat, period. And I'm not the cat, Epaminondas. What's the difference? It's that in my case, my life goes beyond, transcends any, I would say, prior determinism, in such a way that I have to resolve life at my own risk. That's the idea. Then there's anguish. Of course. But will life be anguished? Or do you have any doubt about that? Or do those watching us have any doubt about that? It's clear that with each step we take, there are 360 degrees of possible paths, and each new step represents a new 360 degrees of possible paths. If you've studied combinatorial analysis, you'll see that the end of 10 steps is already an infinite number of lives aborted in the name of a single path taken. There will be anguish, but anguish is inherent to everyone who is forced to, and that's why we are condemned to freedom, everyone who is forced to choose to live. You say it's an opportunity, right? Anguish is an opportunity, yes. But it's necessary to face it from an empowering perspective. It's a given that I will have to choose. So, let me make this task the driving force of history, you know? Well, I wanted to tell you something I believe in. We are not slaves to our species, just like I just talked about the cat. We are not slaves to our species. In other words, just because I'm human doesn't mean I have to live a certain way. Humans have already proven that, in their case, the sky's the limit, right? Now, we are not slaves to our history, either collective or individual. What do I mean by this? Let's give examples. It's very common to hear you say, corruption in certain societies is due to the fact that the colonizers sent the worst kind of people to the colonies, and that's how it was. Well, then you take our case. Look, the guys came in 1500, we're in 2020, look, there wasn't enough time because those first ones died, then their children came. You'll say, no, but the children are very contaminated. Well, they died too. Then the most came, no, but there's still some left now. They died. Look, come on, wasn't there enough time to put together a civilizing program, that allows for auspicious ethical reflection so that we can overcome an initial tendency and become a more just society? First question, because this possibility has to exist. Point number 2, Well, it's very common for people to say, oh, well, in my family it was like this, well, I always lived like this, well, I have ingrained habits. I'm a victim of a culture and I realize that this makes all transgression impossible, makes all personal revolution impossible, and makes it impossible. You know that thing and I accept that until now it was like this, but from tomorrow it won't be anymore. In other words, you realize that you took on the reins, you realize that you became master of your own trajectory, you realize that there are, yes, deep inclinations, but that you are not, on your knees, enslaved by them, but you are someone capable of living against the grain, of living against the grain, of living, well, in constant transgression and, with that, well, making people guess what perhaps was not imagined at first. This possibility exists, because it is also part of the trajectory and history of many people. Therefore, I firmly believe in the possibility that we have, through our lucidity, our intelligence, the need we have to take control of our lives at some point, in the possibility of living a life that, at least in part, coincides with what we expect from it, that is, with what seems most valuable, most precious, most important to us.